I'm here at General Synod in York for our July group of sessions, and for the first time since I've been elected to Synod, and possibly for the first time in a very long time, we've got a real opportunity to debate how the parish system in the Church of England could be, if we wanted it, revitalised and refunded in order to thrive for the rest of the 21st century. We're putting down a motion which would pump £150 million a year into the poorest parishes in the Church of England. £150 million sounds an astronomical amount of money. You might ask where the money tree is that would fund this, but the reality is this money's already been earmarked. It's just been earmarked and set aside in ways that rarely ever actually trickle down to the front line of the Church of England. Let me tell you how it would work. The £150 million that come from the Church Commissioners are split in two parts. The first is £50 million that goes into the Lower Income Communities Fund, LINC. At the moment, this fund is assessed, diocese by diocese, according to a rough sort of metric of how many deprived parishes and not deprived parishes they have, and the money just goes to the diocese. So Robert Choate, the former head of the Office for Budget Responsibility, did an analysis of this last year and revealed that a large number of dioceses just take this money and put it straight into their bank account and spend it how they will. It doesn't get to the lowest income parishes, it just goes to the diocese. What we want to do is to change the whole system, match the funding parish by parish to the parishes at the lowest end of the deprivation scale. What we want is for this money to fund one stipendiary priest in each of the poorest parishes of the country. Now, having reformed the Lowest Income Communities Fund, the best thing we can do is to fill it with money. To fill that fund with £100 million that comes from the strategic development funding that the Archbishop's Council has decided to spend £100 million a year on. It's now called SMMI. Now, this funding was also analysed by Sir Robert Choate, and his report came out last year and showed that for the vast money that had been spent over the last 6 years, £176 million had been earmarked for this, expecting to bring in 89,000 new Christians. Only 12,000 actually turned up, and about half of them had come from other Anglican churches. So despite the fact that this model doesn't seem to be a great success, the Archbishop's Council decided that they would double down on it, put £100 million a year into it, and fund projects here, projects there, pet projects of bishops of the national church, despite the fact that it's been proven not to work. What we want is to use this money and really turbocharge the poorest parishes in the Church of England and give them hope and new life, and most importantly of all, safeguarding from closure. Because the tragedy is, when churches close, they are most likely to be the poorest churches in a diocese. Because when the accountants look at the spreadsheet, they look at the churches that can't afford to pay their full parish share, can't afford their own priest, and they cut those. Even though those are the parishes doing the most work amongst the most vulnerable people in our society. So, giving each of those parishes a guaranteed priest means they're the last people to be on the chopping board when the diocesan axe wielder comes looking. But more than that, we want to do something further. As the entirety of the costs of one stipendiary priest will be covered, those parishes should not have to pay any parish share. There should be a jubilee for those parishes, for the poorest parishes in the Church of England, enabling them to keep the money that they've raised and to spend it on what they need in their community. Whether it's to boost their food bank, whether it's outreach, whether it's an administrator, whatever it is that they know that they need, they can spend that money on. Pumping £150 million into diocesan budgets will also free up those budgets to be able to do other things. Things like the projects that the Strategic Development Fund might have funded can now, diocese by diocese, be looked at a local level. This would transform the Church of England and put our money where our mouth is.
So we now come to item 77, Reverend Marcus Walker, to speak to his amendment. And Marcus, it would be really helpful if you could be no more than 3 minutes. I know that's a lot to ask, but there it is.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Chairman. Marcus Walker, London 168. Synod, as our Lord said, where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. And I will tell you where our heart is not right now. And that is with our poorest parishes. How do we know this? We know this because of the numbers. We know this because of the reports that have been commissioned. The Church Action on Poverty report that came out only in February this year was clear. Our key significant finding is that significantly more churches have closed in low-income areas than in more affluent areas. In Cornwall, the ratio of priests is 1 to 14,000 in the poorest areas and 1 to 5,000 in the richest areas. Across our whole nation, the question of how our church engages with the poorest parts of our nation is live. We know why this is. If you are the spreadsheet person in the diocese looking at where cuts must happen because the budget is overrunning, you will cut the poorest parishes that do not send in the full parish share. We know how it works. First, you shrink the number of clergy. Then you merge the number of churches. And then those churches, one by one, shut. Sacraments stopped. The Word of God available only if you have a car that can drive you there. We know from the reports what happens when we do this. From anecdote to evidence, we didn't hear this little segment of that report. The findings show that single church units under one leader are more likely to grow than when churches are grouped together. Going deeper tells us that stipendiary ministry is vital to the growth of parishes. Where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. And we have a lot of treasure. And where we put that treasure tells us where our heart is. I want to suggest that we invert the way in which the diocesan spreadsheet managers look at the churches in their diocese. I want the last church to be cut to be the poorest church. I want the lowest income communities fund that Sir Robert Choate revealed was so often skimmed off at the top by the diocese, or in other dioceses just put into the general funds to be targeted parish to parish. And I want the £100 million that has been earmarked for the SMMI to go into that. But most of all, Synod, I want us to decide this next year, not the Archbishop's Council, but you and me. So vote for this amendment, which I place on the table.
Kate, to respond.
Thank you, Marcus. I'm going to resist this amendment. We absolutely do need to support our most deprived parishes and communities, and I have spoken in this synod a number of times about urban mission and ministry, my great passion for and commitment to it. My heart is in the inner city of Liverpool. But I don't believe this amendment in the correct way is the correct way to achieve that aim, so I resist it.
So, Kate, having not supported the amendment, it will lapse unless 25 members stand or show by green ticks if they're online. Yes, there are 25 members, so the debate continues. Now, can I just let you into a little secret? And the secret is that if we adjourn, it's very unlikely that this item of business will come back. Not because I'm not here tomorrow, because somebody else could take the chair, but I gather that the pressure of business is such that that's not likely to happen. So I'm going to ask for one speech in favour and one speech against. 2 minutes. In favour or of the against the amendment? Then yes. In favour of the amendment? Yes, you, sir. Oh, sorry. He's against. Sorry. In favour up there. Thank you. 2 minutes.
Philip North, 8 Blackburn. You might expect me to support this, and indeed I admire what lies behind Father Walker's amendment. The current system for funding parochial ministry, especially in income-deprived communities, is broken and unjust. We need a proper debate about an unfair and dysfunctional method, or will become increasingly a church for the rich. But this amendment will not help us to address any of those complex issues. In fact, it will do the precise opposite. Urban parishes take pride in being able to take responsibility for their own life. But this amendment will reduce urban parishes to dependency, a dependency that they will find it very hard to break out of. It'll create hundreds of unfillable posts, hundreds of tiny urban parishes that don't justify a full-time priest. It will take us back to the bad old days of Darlow, which saw so much money used unproductively. In seeking to address an injustice, it will create many more and will lead to huge resentment, especially amongst parishes that are just outside whatever we decide constitutes deprived. In addition, it will take away from dioceses the funding they need to invest in long-term mission initiatives. It misunderstands LICF, which is not an exhaustible sum of money. It misunderstands the helpful role that SMIB plays in supporting dioceses. As someone who is completely passionate, drivenly passionate, about the health and vitality of the urban church, and who steered through Synod's commitment to have a church on every estate, I'm afraid I have to say this amendment will not help. In fact, it will do the very opposite. What we need is intelligently focused investment in growth and in buildings that enable us to have strong, entrepreneurial churches in deprived areas, freed from dependency, forming their own lay leaders and able to sustain a healthy life, fostering a short-termist dependency mentality, which this amendment will do, will not achieve that. So please vote down this specific amendment, but please also don't forget what Father Walker and others are trying to do, which is to start a debate to build a juster church.
Tom Wolford, 070, currently Blackburn, but given that my bishop is... shortly to become available. Because it concerns the diocese and not the central bodies of the Church of England, there's no facility open to Synod members to ask this question. How much has been spent cumulatively by the 42 dioceses of the Church of England on preparing bids and monitoring strategic development funding? Some dioceses have full-time specialist staff working entirely on such bids. In other dioceses, preparing such bids is a core component of the working hours of a number of central diocesan staff. We don't know and we can't have the answer to that question, but I suspect that it's in the millions of pounds every year. This amendment that we're considering is definitely a blunt instrument. It's far from perfect, but so, as we all acknowledge, is SDF, and so will be its successor. Yes, some of the money that would be redirected through link funding direct to the parishes this amendment proposes will be spent poorly and unproductively, while much will be invested wisely and effectively, again, just like SDF. But one advantage of this amendment is the savings that it will deliver to the dioceses themselves by cutting through the massive diocesan bureaucracy involved in the competitive bidding process. Thank you.
Now, Archbishop, can I say this? I'm willingly call you, but I remind myself that everything the chairman says is right, so I can tell the time and define the time, but there it is. Can you, 2 minutes?
It's a 10-second speech,
Good.
which should be longer, which is just to say nobody's fault, not yours, certainly not Robert Hammond's, but I lament again the fact that when we come to discuss vision and strategy things, the time is always squeezed, where it's not for other things. I blame no one.
I might agree, but there it is. I'm going to move the closure on item 77. Those in favour, please show. Those against, please show. Closure is clearly carried. So we vote on item 77.
Jack Shepherd, Liverpool 153. Please, could we have a vote by houses?
Only if 25 members stand, and you will understand the consequences of doing this. But do I see 25 members standing?
Can I cancel my...
Yeah. Thank you very much indeed. So, so we move to vote on item 74. Those in favour, 77. On item 77, the amendment proposed by Marcus Walker. Those in favour, please show. Those against, please show. That's clearly lost. Now.